Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Caite and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. Perfect timing. Caite's rooster just crowed again as we start to talk, so it's full on barnyard mode. Now, normally this is when we do our intro and talk about what's been going on the farms and in the houses and with the kids for the last week or so. But most of this episode is actually going to be about Caite and I. So we're not going to go too in depth in the usual banter because you're going to hear us for most of the episode, so we're not going to cover that usual stuff. But we do get to introduce somebody to you because we're not just doing the whole thing by ourselves. We have someone who's going to interview us, which always feels a little bit weird, but she's a pro, so we're going to be good. We're in good hands. So we actually get to introduce you to someone who's been working with us for a little while now. She's actually our editor, so she gets to hear every episode and take out all of our flubs, and she gets the outtakes as well when things go wrong. So we invited Krysta Paffrath here today, and she's our editor and also head of the Rural Podcast Network. Did I get it right?
You got it.
Okay, good. Yeah. I was like, as I'm going into it, I was like, I'm pretty sure I know the name. There's so many rural networks and agencies and groups and things. So yes. So we are part of that with Krista, and she's been working with us on making us sound better for many months now. So welcome to Barnyard Language, Krista. Officially, people actually get to hear your voice now.
I am so excited for this. I don't know. I think it's been close to a year. I want to say like maybe last September, last August, maybe. I think it was right before the holidays that I started working with you guys, and it has just been a complete joy. Your shows just are, I feel like I learned something new. And you guys are a parenting podcast, but I am not yet a parent. But I feel like I'm so prepared because of your podcast. So thank you for the lovely conversations.
Well, that's reassuring. You know, like one of our main things is like drop your standards. So that's always a good lesson, right? Before you become a parent someday. So before you start interviewing us, I want to ask you our first question that we ask everybody else. So Krista, what are you growing?
Well, that's the other thing. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and at the time, right now, I do not live on a farm. I did grow up rurally. I grew up with horses and goats and chickens, and just in this season of life right now, it makes the most sense for me and my husband to live in town. So with town living, I'm growing 3 dogs. They are kind of my little dog children. I have looking at it right now. I have a Border Collie Australian Shepherd mix, and then I have 2 Catahoula mixes that are a little bit younger. So I'm growing 3 dogs, and then I'm growing the Rural Podcast Network. So I will have been going on that for about a year in November. And on the side, as like a fun project, I'm also growing a Western lifestyle magazine. So that goes out quarterly, and that's something that not a lot of people know about. But yeah, so those are the things that I'm growing right now.
What's its name? Is it called the Western Lifestyle Magazine, or does it have a catchier title?
It does have a name. We just rebranded in January. It's still fairly new, but it's called Modern Cowboy Magazine. And it's all about bringing the Western lifestyle to anybody interested in being a cowboy, and that doesn't necessarily mean having to live on a ranch to enjoy it. So
I love it. That's a lot of things. And tell our listeners a little bit more about the podcast network, because obviously we are podcast obsessed. And if you're listening to us, then you probably like other podcasts. So who else are you working with?
Yeah. So the Rural Podcast Network started like I said, it started about a year ago, but I've been managing and producing podcasts for several years. I found myself with several clients that fall under the rural Western agriculture niche. I felt like it was not that I was doing them a disservice, but I felt like there needed to be a larger umbrella to encompass them. And so the Rural Podcast Network was born, and it really serves as a hub and a community for rural Western and ag podcasters to come together. We have monthly masterminds. There's a whole library of templates available for all of my clients to use. And it really, like I said, I really felt like there was a space needed to really help podcasters in this space grow rather than just, have them posted online somewhere or, use them for advertising numbers or anything like that. So that was really where the need came from. And then as far as some of the other podcasts I work with, obviously you guys are kind of in the parenting space. I have a podcast in the dairy space. Up Level Dairy is a great podcast for dairy professionals and producers looking to up level their business and their operation. I have several podcasts in like the entrepreneurial space. Ag Women Connect is a networking group for women in agriculture. They have chapters all over the country, but they also do a weekly show that goes on rural radio. So yeah, I have all kinds of niches. I actually just in the last couple months picked up a Brahmin podcast. She's one of the top Brahmin breeders in the country. And I can't tell you how much I learn about every facet of agriculture, everything from parenting to now Brahmin breeding to the dairy industry. If you had asked me 2 years ago if I thought that I would be editing a dairy podcast and learning literally all the ins and outs of how to manage a dairy, I would have told you were crazy. So I love what I do. I learn something new literally every day. And it's a joy to be able to share these stories that are so important, not only to you, but to your guests as well.
There is something about podcasts, right? I feel like every other sentence I start, like with a friend or even with my husband, it's like, well, I heard this thing on a podcast. Like, I don't see all that many people, but I listen to a lot of things. So here's where I get all my information. But there's so much out there, and especially in the ag and rural spaces, we're far apart, but we have so much in common, which is one of the things that we learn all the time when we're talking to people. All right, I'm going to stop talking for a second and let you take over. So, Krista, interview us.
Yes. Well, first of all, when I was making this show outline, I'm so familiar with your show. I'm like, oh, I cannot wait until the tables are turned. And I actually get to hear you guys answer all of the questions that you ask all of your guests. So, with that, Arlene, if you want to start us off, what are you growing?
Right. So this is the big question we ask everybody. And so I am growing first and foremost 4 kids who are almost all taller than me now. So we're successful in at least growing their height. So I have an 18-year-old daughter, and then I have 3 sons who are 16, 13, and 9. And we live on a dairy farm. So my husband is 6th generation on this property, and my kids are the 7th, if any of them choose to stick around here on the farm. So we have a dairy farm. We milk 80 cows in Eastern Ontario, which is kind of, for my American friends, we're between Toronto and Montreal, if you only know the highlights of Canadian cities. And we have Holstein cows and a couple of Jerseys because of my daughter's love of cows of different colors. And then we also grow corn and soybeans and lots of hay on around 700 acres of owned land. And then we have some rented ground as well. So corn for silage and for dry corn, soybeans to sell, and then lots and lots of hay for all of these animals to eat. And I think back when we started, we still had some sheep, but they were more of my father-in-law's passion project, and they have since left the farm. So we're now just cows and kids and crops. Yeah, cows, kids, crops.
Now, I know you ask this question a lot to your guests, and sometimes people can be weird about, asking how much land somebody has. But as somebody who lives in town and does not know how many acres it takes to grow crops for both hay and corn and silage, roughly, how many acres does it take to have 80 dairy cows plus crops?
So we have around 700 acres of owned land and then about 200 acres rented. Now, the area that we live in, some of that is in bush, timber, swamp areas that aren't productive. And some of our land is only ever going to be good enough for hay because it's too close. The rock is too close to the surface. You can't work up that ground. So depending on the year, we have usually in the range of about 150 to 200 acres of soybeans, which all goes to for sale, a little bit more than that in corn, and then hay on top of that, plus the ground that is not productive and is not actively being farmed. Plus, the places that are in, we've got some pasture ground for cows, and what's under and around the barns and farmyards and all that kind of stuff would be incorporated into all of that.
Okay, awesome. And Katie, what are you growing?
Well, right now I'm growing another cat who's trying to get into my office because apparently all of them miss Arlene so much now that she's gone home. My husband and I have a daughter who is almost 8, going on almost 28. She's apparently going to just skip the teenager phase and go straight to just being in charge. And we have a little boy who is 6.5, so they're in first grade and second grade. Okay, sorry, I can't knit and actually answer a question at the same time.
Just for people who only listen to us and have never seen a video of us, Katie is almost always crocheting or knitting while we interview. So I usually have to tell our guests, Katie's not looking at you because her hands are busy, which makes her brain work better. But apparently she can't answer a question and knit or crochet at the same time. So now she actually has to look at the camera and make eye contact.
Idle hands are the devil's playground, Arlene. I'm just going to start all over, and you can just leave all my flubbing in because people are used to it by now. Okay, 1 girl, 1 boy. We raise Normandy beef cattle, which are short, fat, grass-based, great mothers. We have, I think, 16 cow-calf pairs. We have 1 Ayrshire cow who was an engagement gift from my in-laws because we're those people. We have 30-some Katahdin ewes and lambs that we finish out, and a few chickens. Some random ducks that have all gone pretty feral. There's 2 that live in the coop still in some sort of, I think, same-sex partnership, but they don't seem to actually be romantic. They just refuse to spend any time with any other ducks. I don't know. Whatever. That's their business. We have an Australian Shepherd and a Labrador Heeler cross who's getting old. Our kids are the 5th generation on this farm. My in-laws live across the road, and we have about 300 acres that's split between corn, beans, small grain, and hay, pasture, timber, and conservation reserve prairie. And my husband and I also both work full-time on off-farm.
Awesome.
And I feel like I'm forgetting something important, but I don't think I really am.
We could say the podcast. We're growing that too.
Oh, the podcast. The podcast. We're growing the podcast.
We're in our 4th
Yes.
season, and we're keeping going. We're hopefully growing community is one of the reasons we started. So that's the goal.
Yes, and I am excited. We are going to get to a little bit of then and now further in the interview. So, but before we get there, again, you always ask your guests kind of what their background in ag is. Katie's got her fly swatter out, so if we hear a smack, then that's what it is. So, but that's normal. I can't hear a rooster. So
yeah, that's farmhouse, right?
Okay, so Arlene, why don't you kick us off? What is your background in ag? I know you guys are both several generations in your family, but yeah, how did you get to where you are, and what is your background just since growing up?
So, like I said, we're on my husband's family farm, but I also grew up on a dairy farm. So my dad farmed with his 2 brothers and his parents, and we lived closer to an urban area. So the original farm where my grandparents moved after they got married, they came from 2 different places and left both of their home communities and started a farm fairly close to an urban area that ended up getting bought up for development. So that original farm does not exist anymore. It's under houses, but my dad and his 2 brothers and my grandparents all farmed on a bigger farm than what we have here they had kind of split things up. So there were at one time 4 different sites and then 3 different sites. So where I physically lived was where the milking cows were. So cows didn't calve out there. That was down the road at my uncle's place. But I lived on the location where the milking parlor was, where a lot of the heifers were. A lot of the feeding of the dairy cows was happening on the place where I grew up. Now, in part because of the number of people farming and the way they had things set up, it also meant that there weren't a lot of chores for kids to do until we got a bit older, a bit taller, because milking in a parlor didn't really work out all that well for little kids, and there were no calves to feed or those types of things. So I I was the type of kid who spent a lot of time playing outside and playing in the haymow. My mom usually didn't like us playing in the haymow, but we always tried to get around that and jump in the pile of shavings that was out there and those types of things. So spent a lot of time around the farm, but not really doing many farm chores until I was probably a teenager. And then by virtue of the way the farm was set up, it meant there was a lot of trucking going on. So spending time in the cattle truck with my dad, moving animals from pasture or between the 3 farm locations and that kind of stuff was definitely something that was a childhood memory for me. And because of the way that each of the brothers specialized, my dad was the cow guy and both of them did more of the field work. So my dad, in a real pinch on the very busiest days would sometimes be in a tractor, but for the most part, he was on cows. And my mom was a stay-at-home parent for most of my childhood. I'm the second of 4 kids. And then as we grew older and were teenagers, she ended up working full-time on the farm with my dad. So not that I didn't appreciate the lifestyle I had, but I was definitely one of those kids who was like, I am never going to live on a farm. I'm never going to marry a dairy farmer for sure. It's too much work. I don't want this life. But then, of course, I ended up going to university in the place where all the Aggies hang out in my province. It's the one agricultural university where you go if you're interested in ag. I took a geography degree because I didn't actually want to study agriculture myself, but I was part of junior farmers. I did 4-H, so I was involved in all the organizations and didn't really try all that hard to get away from it because farm people are cool and I like hanging out with them. And so, of course, then you end up meeting lots of them, and inevitably ended up meeting my husband, and he was more appealing than the dairy farming was. But now I've adapted. So I think Katie mentioned that both she and her husband work full time off farm as well as being on the farm, but my husband and I are both in a position where we are both working full time together on the farm. So together all the time.
Yeah. And I am dying to know, this is just more for my own curiosity. So I know, obviously, here in the States, dairy producers, and I'm sure there are some very small scale producers that can sell like direct to consumer, but a lot of times you sell it to a processor. So is it the same way in Canada, or what does that look like for you guys?
So that turns into kind of a bigger discussion. So Canada, milk production or dairy cow production, not goats, it's all controlled by supply management. So at 80 cows, we're actually the average herd size for our province. So the vast majority of farmers in Canada are smaller scale, and everyone has to market their milk through their provincial, basically, marketing agency. There are a few people who do on-farm processing, but it's a different system. They still technically sell their milk in my province, to the dairy farmers of Ontario, and then they buy it back. So everyone is on the same system. Everyone's milk gets picked up. If you live further or closer from a processor, it doesn't matter because everyone is covered by the same system. So our trucking, our marketing, all of those types of things are built into being part of the Dairy Farmers of Ontario. And so that organization manages the distribution of milk, the sale of milk, and all of those types of things. So we are involved as producers, but we don't actually have to manage those contracts or where it goes when the milk truck pulls in the driveway. It gets filled up and it goes wherever it's going to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Like I said, I have a dairy podcast, so I'm always learning something new and always like to. I don't think I've ever talked to a dairy producer in Canada, so except for you, obviously. But
Yes, yeah. So supply management is a whole other. We've got an episode on that. I'll send it. I think it was before you started editing for us, so you can listen to that one because there's a lot there to talk about.
awesome. And Katie, what is your background in ag? How did you get to where you are right now?
I was just Googling some statistics about the average herd size of American dairy farms, and it is 357 cows.
Yeah, I thought it was. That's why I was shocked because I know it's much, much larger here.
Yeah, most herds are over 1,000 head in the US, just to break even.
But also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Katie.
Oh, that was it.
I was just going to say, I think too, land availability, because obviously in Canada, like you guys are working with literally just the bottom half of what would probably be suitable for a dairy cow. Like they need pretty,
Yeah, maybe the bottom eighth, yeah, or less.
yeah. So I would assume that land is probably, I'm just talking, but yeah, that is really interesting.
There's also, the big factor of who our closest neighbor is, right? Where if there's a huge market to our south, but we want to essentially protect agriculture in our own country, which in times of, you know, every day you don't think it's a big deal, but then in times of stress or times of market upheaval, it becomes a big deal. So that's part of what supply management is because the playing field isn't necessarily even. So it's a way that we can protect our industry. And there's pros and cons to it for sure that we don't need to talk about today. But yeah, there's definitely there's reasons. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I will go back and listen to that episode. And I think anybody else should also go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah, that's with Andrew Campbell if you're looking back through our episodes. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Katie, what is your background in ag?
I grew up on a hobby farm in central Iowa, so where it is very flat and has basically for growing corn and beans at least the best soil in the world, which also means that it is now very, very expensive soil, especially as they're putting up more houses. I grew up on a hobby farm, so I don't recall a time that I've ever been able to have poultry and haven't. So we've always had chickens, always had dogs, cats, some rabbits here and there, a pony, geese, ducks, some sheep, some goats, sort of I think a lot of sort of hobby or lifestyle farms like that have sort of a continual flow of different things in and out just as they happen. I grew up being horrified that there were people who lived with their in-laws like on the same property. I swore I would never be one of them. I swore that I would never be a farmer. I liked my chickens well enough, but that was kind of the extent of it. And I left over and over and over and just kept ending up back in Iowa. And one day after many years of leaving and going to Iowa State for animal science and realizing that I wasn't learning any sort of farming I wanted to be doing. I had had some jobs that had gotten me back into agriculture and realized that I did really enjoy it, but that what I was learning at university wasn't what I wanted to be doing. It was a lot of large-scale production, which is totally valid, and with a lot of American systems is kind of the way you're going to go if you want to, make an income. But it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And so I had moved up to Northeast Iowa to work on a friend's farm, and one day was driving home and just got this overwhelming urge to check my long dormant farmersonly.com account, which had only been setting me up with people I already knew, who I was not dating for good reasons. Farmers Only is excellent for the ladies because I think the ratio of men to women on there is probably like 20-1 or something. Saw this guy's profile, dropped him a message, just, if the universe speaks, you have to listen. So, fine, I'll message this guy. He went online that night to delete his account. He had literally told his parents that night that he was never getting married. He was never having kids. He was going to take over the farm. They were just going to have to deal with it. We had our first date 2 days later. I had moved in before the first month was out. We were engaged 3 months after our first date to the day. and we were married the next year. And here we are. My in-laws live across the road. It's actually pretty nice. My in-laws are amazing people, and they are very, very good at setting boundaries and not being too invasive. And I think that's kind of where we're at. What did I miss? I feel like I missed something.
So I am curious, Katie. So you said you grew up on a hobby farm, and for your husband, what was his background? Because you guys now have a beef operation. So where did you guys have it? Obviously, did he have experience? Did you have experience with beef? Or how did that come into play?
He actually, this farm was all dairy, registered Ayrshires until 2009. My in-laws quit milking because the average herd size is up to 357 cows, and they weren't about to go there. My husband really had no interest in milking full-time. He grew up on this farm. He's lived on this property his whole life. Didn't really want to milk cows. He's a tractor guy. But looking at ways that we could supplement our income and still be growing something besides just row crops. His folks were feeding out cattle. They were just, buying bull calves from local dairies and feeding them out and selling them. And so we started getting into beef cattle, and we have a neighbor who's put 50 plus years into his Normandy herd. And we drove by his farm so many times that I think we probably had to buy some calves just so he wouldn't be too worried that we were stalking him, because they're the cutest calves in the world. And so we did spend a lot of time kind of parked outside his pasture watching cows. And here we are.
Awesome. And let's see, I also was going to say, and I feel bad for skipping this over, but I was really curious about your background with the beef. But I'm pretty sure that Farmers Only needs to sponsor this podcast, because if that isn't a success story, I don't know what is. So shout out to Farmers Only.
It occurred to me, though, that probably a lot of our listeners are already partnered up, but maybe more of our listeners have older kids or relatives who need to find somebody. So yeah, I think Farmers Only should be sponsoring us.
All right. Awesome. And so now we have both of your backgrounds. We kind of know how you got to where you are on each of your respective operations. And this is a story that I don't know, so I'm dying to know. Maybe I know a little bit of it. How did your guys' friendship start? Like, how you guys, Arlene, you're in Canada. Katie, you're in rural Iowa. How did this happen?
We're an online dating success story.
Yeah, that's right.
Basically, like platonic online dating. We listen to the same parenting podcast, interestingly, because it's a show that was, I think, more generally aimed at urban women. The hosts both live in LA, and Arlene is, I think, still the admin of the Rural Moms offshoot group for that show, right? She's giving me a look like I'm telling the whole story wrong.
No, that's true. Yeah, like that show has a Facebook group, and that spawned other Facebook groups of, special interest groups. Yeah, and so then there was a farm and ranch offshoot of the main group that we ended up both being part of.
And then I had a mentorship through the Women's Food and Ag Network, and knew that I really wanted to do something that was more community building. And so thought about how useful podcasts have been to me in feeling a sense of community, because especially for rural folks especially with young kids, seeing other humans and talking to other humans can be difficult. And it was really nice to have that podcast that we were both listening to. But there's a lot of challenges that ag families deal with that are less common in Los Angeles, I guess. And so I had said that I wanted to start a podcast, but nobody wants to listen to me talk for 2 hours. And if I had done it by myself, there probably wouldn't have been a first episode. There definitely wouldn't be 4 seasons. So I was thinking about all the people I knew who might be good as a co-host, and knowing that I wanted somebody that was somebody I wanted to spend time with, but that wasn't basically me. because nobody wants to listen to two hosts who are exactly the same person. It's not interesting. And so I thought about everyone I knew, and I think Arlene was the only person on that list. She was certainly way at the top if anyone had been on that list. And so I messaged her, and I don't know how many times she said no. She,
I'm not sure if I ever actually said no, but it took me a long time to say yes.
Yeah, she played hard to get for a while. If I had been trying to date her, it would have been real creepy. It would not have been okay.
Yeah. So we did actually meet once in person, though, before the podcast idea came up, because in that farm parenting group, I had posted one time saying, I'm going to a World Dairy Expo. Does anyone live near Madison? Is anyone going to be there? Do you want to meet up? Kind of thing. And Katie doesn't live all that far from there. So she suggested that we could meet up conveniently in a cheese store, which is what we did. And so we met up one time in person before we actually ever started doing the podcast. So we had a conversation before. It wasn't just messaging in a mom's Facebook group, which is also perfectly legitimate.
By all that far, she means I live 3 hours from where the World Dairy Expo is held. But I only drove like halfway. And I brought the boy child with me. He was a lot smaller.
So your first date was in a cheese store. I love that.
Yes, yeah, we have a selfie with this weird, like, giant mouse statue behind us, because if you're in a small town, you got to build a big thing to attract customers, right?
I love that. And I wasn't sure, like I said, I think, and actually I didn't know about the Facebook group, but I think you're right. Podcasts build a great platform for building community. And I think sometimes, and I take this is like my own theory on it, is that if one person can listen to your podcast and come away with feeling like, I'm not alone in this, especially with a parenting podcast and especially with a rural parenting podcast. Like you said, there are challenges that women and rural moms go through that nobody else goes through. I mean, here in the US, and I don't know what the population is in Canada, but I think it's like less than 2% of our population here in the States is ag. So that's right off the bat, 2%. And then if you split that into each of their respective niches beyond that, that's a very small percent of the population. And that makes your chances of connecting and building community with people that much smaller. And so, like I said, I think that you guys are doing an amazing, I don't want to call it a service, but you guys just offer something that people can come away with feeling like, oh my gosh, like I'm not alone. Like I am allowed to hop on a Zoom call and have my feral children running in the background and the rooster in front of my window, and it's fine. I can show up just as who I am, and it's fine. Like I don't need to be this polished, perfect mom or farm wife, which I think sometimes, especially right now, I don't know what you guys think, but I think right now it's really popularized, like that homesteading, polished, cottage core kind of thing. And it's just not what it is, right? And you guys are like, I think the perfect, like I said, the perfect example of what you're allowed to be, and you don't need to be anything else. So that's coming from somebody that lives in town and doesn't have kids. So I am probably the 1% of your audience that doesn't even fit your target demographic, but that's what I come away with listening to your episodes each and every week. So
thank you, because that's our goal, right? Is that we want people to be able to show up as they are and not feel like they need to be something else, and that we're all just figuring out as we go along, because that's the reality of parenting, is you don't know what you're getting yourself into at any stage, because kids are unpredictable. Apparently they're humans like us.
Weird. And also farm life is unpredictable. Like,
yes, that too.
Like you never know, like the tractor could break. I mean, animals are like a whole other thing, and especially when you're dealing with more than a couple. So yeah, lots of challenges. Go ahead, Katie.
I feel like too, it's really enabled us to have deeper conversations. And I know I have in real life friends who I have a much deeper relationship with because they listen to the podcast, because we have that time to be really honest about things like, there's poop everywhere in my house, and just the realities of life, because I mean, there are people for whom that like aesthetic homesteading, long linen dresses, flowers, beautiful clean children is reality, and it's something they enjoy, and it's something they get a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from, and that is fantastic. Like, I don't ever want somebody to think that I'm like tearing somebody else down for being too good at being pretty, but it is in no way, shape, or form representative of what my life looks like. And so if the only thing I'm seeing is people who can do that, and then all we're hearing is, self-care is so important, but self-care is just taking a shower, and that's not self-care. That's maintenance. You are a human. Being able to bathe is a normal thing. But to be able to really have these conversations and normalize vulnerability with each other, and to be able to talk about all the things, I think there's such a pressure that if your life is not literally the worst, then your life is perfect. And those are your options. Either everything can be perfect or everything can be the worst. And there's no space for reality in between there. And it's really important to me that we take the time to celebrate when things go right, and we take the time to brag when we do something well, or all of us, at least occasionally, have moments of real genius and really good parenting, and it's important to celebrate that. But it's also important to say, needing medication for mental health is a normal, fine, common, reasonable thing. Fighting with our spouse over something stupid is a common thing that we all do, and anybody who says they don't is a liar or doesn't have a spouse. But just all these totally normal things that we can just, for some reason, reading about these things doesn't hit the same way as listening to people actually talking about it and saying, this is all normal. We are all dealing with this shit. And that doesn't mean that it's a thing that any of us should be having to deal with, but you're certainly not the only one doing it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, like you said, having the tough conversations. And again, going back to ag is such a small part of the population, and we're a little behind, I think, in terms of talking about mental health and accepting, like you said, that it's okay to take medication for your mental health, that it's okay to talk to a therapist, that it's okay to ask for help. So I think talking about it, but then you mentioned listening to it is a whole other thing. And I think that's where podcasting is so powerful. Even if you don't see the impact of what you're doing, people can hear the emotion behind it, right? Like you said, it's completely different than reading about it. It's completely different than scrolling on social media and seeing a post promoting mental health, because you were listening to somebody's story who has gone through it, and you're hearing the emotion, which is going to connect you in a completely different way. So yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And we got a little bit off topic. Do either of you have anything else you want to add to that before we move on? No? Okay, great. So this does segue really nicely as we're talking about kind of perspective and the purpose of the podcast. I would love to know each of your either perspective or your insights from what you've taken away over the last 4 years, the last 4 seasons of this podcast. What has been like your biggest either like aha or, your biggest kind of perspective shift in heading into your 4th season since you started?
One thing I think this past season, especially, that really came to the forefront for me is now that we've had some more guests from different places. We've talked to people from Australia and New Zealand and from the UK, and almost we haven't hit every state and province yet, but across North America, and I guess in Japan too, at how similar everyone's concerns are, how similar their life situations are. I mean, they're all in ag, obviously, because that's the one thing that we is tying the podcast together. But it doesn't matter what particular type of crop or what particular type of livestock you're raising or whatever it is you're doing within agriculture is. We all have way more in common than not. And that's been, I guess, I knew that, from having done exchanges, and my family has hosted people from exchange on ag exchanges before, and it's always so cool to talk to people who are farming in different countries. But the parenting piece is so similar too, that we're all facing some very similar challenges, and that talking about this stuff doesn't change it, but it does make it makes you feel less alone, and that is huge, because it's part of the issue is when you're not when you feel like you're the only one, that that makes you think that there's something wrong with you, and there isn't.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard Language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage.
Katie, do you have any thoughts, or what's your biggest takeaway heading into your 4th season?
Nobody knows what the hell is going on. That's most of it. I feel like so much of life, and I thought maybe this was just me, but I'm starting to suspect that it's not. So much of life feels like everybody else got a cheat sheet, or like a syllabus, or like somehow everyone knows what's going on except you. They don't. I mean, probably some people do, but I refuse to spend too much time with those people because I don't need to feel any worse about myself. Anybody who makes you feel bad for admitting that you don't know what's going on is a jerk. Just don't spend time with them. Don't listen to it. Most people are a lot more tender-hearted than they might let on. Everyone has somebody they care about. Everybody has somebody they worry about. And all of us are a lot more alike than we are different in those ways. And also, most people just really, really want to tell their stories to somebody. And it's really an honor to get to hear all these stories. And some of them are hysterical, and some of them are really strange, and a few of them have been not terribly interesting, but everyone's life is interesting to them, and everyone has something interesting about them, even if you have to, work a little harder sometimes to find out what it is. Sorry, Arlene. Some folks are a bit more of a challenge than others. Some of us are much more prone to oversharing than others, and it is easier to get stories out of us. It's harder to get us to stop talking. I am. I feel like generally you can assume that everybody is doing their best. Some people's best is maybe not always that great, but we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they're at least trying. And unless we know the person is really a D-bag, probably giving them the benefit of the doubt is not going to hurt us. And if we know that it will hurt us, probably we just shouldn't be interacting with these people if we don't absolutely have to. So that's my life advice right there.
Golly, that was something. No, like in a good way. No, it's just it really resonates with me. And again, like I think this applies to so many people, even if they aren't parents and even if they aren't living on the farm, because like I was just talking to Arlene, it's so hard like to look at other people who might seem like they have it together and be like, it's so easy to say, why can't that be me? why does it feel like I don't have my shit together? When and social media is awful about this, because you can go online and see these perfectly, and again, going back to like the cottage core homesteading vibe that's going on right now, is it's so easy to be like, why doesn't my life look like this? When in reality, like like you said, Katie, is I think everybody's just doing their best. And for some people, being able to put up that polished photo and that polished Instagram post makes them feel like they have it together. And who knows, like we really truly don't know what's behind the curtain. I mean, for and that goes for all of us. We really don't know what each individual person is dealing with. And I think that if we all came into it with, oh, I think that person is doing their best today, how much would that change the conversation and the perspective of interacting with anybody? Honestly, like I can come up with a few situations on my hand that if somebody had said to me, hey, I think she's just doing her best, I'm going to give her a little bit of a break, my mindset around perfectionism and making sure that I make people happy would be completely different.
I've found for myself too that the more I admit that I don't know what's going on, and sometimes that takes a different form. When I'm at work, I'm generally, even I am not going to be like, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing, because they pay me to know what I'm doing. But I know, like, for myself, especially going into more urban areas anymore, and like ordering at a restaurant I've never been to makes me incredibly anxious, because I don't know what I want and their menu's different, and I'm standing there thinking, and if God forbid it's counter service, there's people standing behind you and there's somebody waiting for you to answer. And then if God forbid they've got weird sizes or strange names, or like, it's making me anxious just thinking about it. But I've started really making a point of just being like, never been here, never seen your menu, no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to stand over here in the corner and think about it for a minute. That people are generally really nice about it. And if they're not, it's because they're dicks. And then you don't have to worry about their opinion, because them being a dick is not any reflection on us. And I feel like for me, this aesthetic social media thing, like, it's not really my vibe, because they all look alike to me and none of them look like my life. But I don't try to do it for the same reason I don't wear high heels. It's just bad. It is not a good idea. I don't have the attention and the focus and the whatever it takes to be an aesthetic, homesteading, high heel, lipstick wearing person. I'm just not. And so it's awesome that there are folks who are, because there is apparently a need for that. And it's awesome that there are people who can supply that. But I don't have to compete with them or dislike them or judge them or really have any opinion about them at all, because it has nothing to do with me. That's a thing for them and this is a thing for me. And people can go back and forth between the two. And, generally nobody's doing anything specifically at you. And if they are, that's on them. And this is basically my continual conversation with my children at this point is, nobody's doing anything at you. And if they are, then just don't spend time with them. I mean, in adult life, there's times that you can't avoid people, but most of us can at least really cut down on how much weight we give to people who don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And that wraps up that thought perfectly. But I am curious, kind of along the same lines, is there an episode or a guest that you guys have had on that really stuck out to you? And obviously probably the ones from the last season are going to be the most recent, but is there anyone that comes to mind right off the bat that was just really, really impactful for you guys?
One person I've been thinking about lately, and she was just in the last season, and we actually brought her back for our replay episodes this summer, that I've thought about a lot is Bailey Kemery from I think she was either Manitoba or Saskatchewan. She's Canadian anyway, and she was a farm accident survivor. So she had a farm accident as a child, and just thinking about the impact that that has had on her family and her community and her entire life, on her children, probably her children's children, will have impacts from that accident. And it was an accident. It was no one's fault. It's just a thing that happens. And I mean, we talk about farm safety all the time, and anyone who's raising and growing kids on the farm is probably always thinking about it. And I don't want to add more stress to people's lives because, I mean, life is already stressful enough. But just, yeah, just thinking about the fact that an accident like that can have such a huge impact on so many people. It Maybe it kind of reaffirmed some of the things that I did when my kids were little, and how maybe people thought I was paranoid about certain things. We had some rules that I don't know. My in-laws would have never said it, but I don't know if they agreed with all the things that I did or that we did and I held firm on. But you never know, and it can be so huge. And yet some of the positives in her life came out of that too. She ended up becoming a paramedic and going into emergency preparedness and trying to prevent other people from having accidents, or helping people who were in a similar situation to her. And so you can't look at an accident being, I mean, it was obviously bad, but there were good things that came out of it. And that's not to say that everything happens for a reason, because I hate that phrase because I think it's bullshit. But I mean, at the same time, yes, things do happen for a reason, because, like gravity or, equipment or whatever. Yes, there is a reason that accident happened. I don't think that the good things that came out of it justify the fact that the accident happened. Like, I think that phrase can be taken the wrong way. But yeah, that is one person who I've thought about a lot since we talked to her.
I think that's the most like passionate like phrase that I've heard you got. Like, you're usually, I don't want to say reserved, but usually it's Katie throwing around the "this is bullshit" term. So that's gonna be your clip from this episode was "that's bullshit." I love that.
It's true though. Like, sure, everything happens for a reason. I get it. Yes, the sun shines for, chemical reasons, whatever. But using that phrase to put off someone's, like a tragedy, or, that someone has died, and you just throw out that platitude, well, like, everything happens for a reason. It's like, no, that's not good enough. And that doesn't help me. That doesn't help them to feel better. Like, yes, that person died because their body stopped working, but I hate that phrase.
Katie, what about you?
I was just looking it up. The first one that comes to mind is actually Arlene's sister, Maida, came on our show, and she was one of our first interviews. And for her to take a big chance on doing something, presumably because Arlene asked her to, because she didn't know me for shit. And I remember, I don't know if she actually had a panic attack or was just really close to it coming into our show. And she did it anyway. And she opened up about such an incredibly personal thing. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to go listen to the damn episode. But the response we got from listeners, and the response we got from people saying that they had never admitted to themselves that they were struggling with the same thing, and that Maida was so willing to just do the thing and put herself out there on the off chance that it would help somebody else, and that she was so willing to talk about something so personal. And how many of our guests have really dug into things much deeper than we could have expected, and for that matter, how many people we have made cry on this show, many of them quite unexpectedly, including ourselves. I think all of us have things that we don't know are still so tender, as they clearly are when we start talking about them. And the other one, for many of the same reasons of just being so themselves, is Faith Buss, whose name I had to look up. She was our snow burning guest from Saskatchewan, and just her telling this story about the snow burning, and if, again, you don't know what I'm talking about, go listen to the episode. I believe it was season 3. When people tell us about things they've done, mistakes they've made, it makes the world so much more accessible for all of us, because it's just more fuel on nobody's making fun of you. And if they are, it's because they're jerks. Don't listen to them. But just anyone not willing to laugh at themselves is always a treasure, and more people should be willing to laugh at themselves and basically anything else, because life is too rough and it's too short. And, all we've got is making fun of ourselves and others, but in a loving, snow burning kind of way. So
Awesome. And I think what I'll do is I will link those episodes in the show notes. So to make it really, really easy if you guys want to go back and listen to those episodes. Okay, so we are officially in the 4th season of the podcast. You guys have gone through 3 seasons so far of raising your kids and doing the podcast. And I know, Katie, I think we've probably had conversations about this, but you guys are in vastly different places now than you were when you started. So what has changed in parenting for both of you since starting the podcast? Arlene, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm bad at math, so I actually did some subtraction to figure out what ages my kids would have been when we started. So I would have had a 15, 13, 10, and 6-year-old when we started. So it's wild to think about how much kids grow up in just a few short years. I'm thinking about the fact that when we started, we were still very much here anyway. We were still in COVID times. We were probably going back to school after 2 rounds of lots of remote learning and major lockdowns where I live. We were months and months being separated from our families and friends and from the people that we wanted to be able to spend time with, and teaching my kids or trying to support their learning at home. Yeah, I would have had kids. I've got 2 who have learned to drive in that amount of time, which if you have teenagers, you know what a stressful experience that can be. Even if they have driven tractors or equipment around the farm, that doesn't mean that they have automatically like absorbed all the rules of the road. Let me tell you, there's still a lot of things to remember once you get it on the streets. And yeah, from a 6 to a 9-year-old is also a big jump in terms of going from feels like little kid to big kid, and also sending my first off to university, which was a big change for all of us, and adjusting to both her being away and supporting from afar, which is a unique challenge too, trying to still be a parent and let them make their decisions, but also being somewhere where they can come when they have those hard days or trying to navigate adulthood and figuring all that stuff out. I got multiple texts already this morning about different grown-up tasks. So yeah, there's a lot that has changed in just a few years. It's that whole the days are long but the years are short.
Yeah. Katie, what about you?
While Arlene was here last week, we were adding up how many years of parenting experience we have. And while Arlene has 56 to my 13, so she has actually parented enough years to have raised me and both my kids, which honestly to me was such a refreshing way of looking at it, because I'm an only child. I didn't grow up with little kids around, and watching other people parent, especially young children, has been a very uncomfortable thing for me a lot of times, because I am really out of my depth with little kids. You can't reason with them. They don't listen to anything. They say little people, little problems. What they don't tell you is that all of those problems are really effing loud at all times.
And you keep looping back through them over and over and over again.
They're never done. The problem is never, this is never the last time you're going to have this problem. And I feel like parenting and ag to some extent is one of the few jobs where you would look at somebody with a decade of experience versus, 50 years of experience and be like, well, why can't you do that just as well? Why doesn't my, 11-month-old walk as well as your 18-year-old? Like, why don't you know all about moving cattle because you've had one beef cow for 6 months? Like, you learn these things by doing them. And my kids have become people. I mean, they were 3 and 4.5 when we started this show, so they were still kind of babies. They were little, and they're still little. I mean, comparatively, but getting to see and really see behind the scenes, as it were, of parenting older kids and seeing the importance of things like letting kids figure out their own mistakes from when they're little so that the first time they're dealing with making a mistake isn't when they're 19. They have little problems now. They can come up with little solutions now. And then you're not just throwing them into the deep end when it's, I got somebody pregnant, I wrecked a car, I lost a job, whatever it is, that's not the first time they're making decisions and making mistakes and dealing with consequences. And watching them become good people, I mean, my kids are effing feral. Arlene could be the first to testify to this, having been in our home recently. They have abominable table manners. They are generally filthy and sticky and usually smelly. They're loud. They're rowdy. They're good people. They are both thoughtful and kind, and not always as thoughtful and kind as they could be because they are little kids. And, it takes a lot of practice. And even as adults, we're not as thoughtful and kind as we could be. But getting to see them grow into people that I will be proud to know and that I will be proud to say, I made that. And already so often to see them and be able to say, my kid may be completely feral most of the time, but this time they did something really kind. And I feel like that is an ongoing trend, and hopefully eventually they will grow into bathing because they want to and not because I'm basically sitting on them. And my son won't be licking the ranch dressing bottle. And, hopefully we'll grow out of some of those behaviors. But getting to have company about the honest parts of raising, I mean, we're making people. We're not raising babies, we're making whole people. And raising a 6-year-old isn't the point of what we're doing. I'm not here to make a great 6-year-old. I'm not here to make the best 7-year-old. I'm here to make good adults. And now I feel like I've just inspired myself, which is nice because my kids were real damn sticky and I don't think either of them brushed their teeth before they went to school today. So my apologies to their teachers. Oh well.
You said something earlier, Katie, about assuming that adults are trying their best, and I think that we need to remember to do that's the same for our kids, right? That they, at every stage, that they're trying their best, even when they're having a really hard time, and they're maybe not, their attitude or their demeanor is not what we would consider their best. Often we are getting them at their most tired and their most vulnerable, and they're probably trying their best in the whatever stage they're in. So giving them the benefit of the doubt too can be helpful.
Well, and two, remembering that this is how they get the experience of how to act fairly decently, even when they're not at their best, and to be able to say, I am not at my best. I cannot do this right now. Peace out. And this is how they learn to do that, is by practicing and us calmly yet firmly saying, that's not acceptable. And showing them how to...
Yeah, giving them a redo.
I don't want to say do better because that sounds very like, you are not allowed to fail at anything. But yes.
Yeah, but you can give them another opportunity to try again.
Love that. This goes great into our next question. So obviously the challenges would have been different when you started the show, but what are some of your parenting challenges right now? And I know you guys ask this question a lot to your guests as we move kind of more into the parenting side of things, and we have been talking about parenting for the last several questions. But yeah, what are your challenges now in parenting?
The one thing that, especially this summer, has highlighted for me as a newer challenge is having children as coworkers and it, both coworkers and employees. I mean, on a family farm, whatever the definition of that is, um, providing the right opportunities for them to use their skills. And they're at an age where we genuinely need their assistance, and figuring out how to balance family life and farm life together is is a challenge for sure. And my kids are overwhelmingly really good and will, um, mostly happily, but usually willingly, do the tasks that are assigned to them, especially when it comes to farm work. And we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that they are compensated for their time and get breaks and still get to be kids, but that the reality is that we also need their labor at this stage of life and the stage of that our business is in. And so trying to balance all that out is challenging for sure. And I think in line with that, as we depend more on our family as the workforce for our farm, also trying to make sure that we find time for the family that is not just in the workplace is becoming more challenging, because if we all slot in at different times and we're all on the work schedule, then how do you find the days away that we used to have when they were little, where it was just my husband and I need to be replaced and then we could take off. But if everyone, we need to find someone to replace each of the kids, then that gets more challenging. I think for me too, one of the other challenges that probably into teenagehood most parents would identify with is figuring out the balance of how much um, technology is a part of their life. And I also accept the fact that a lot of what I see as time on technology is also the way they interact with their peers. Because when I was a teenager, I would come home and talk on the phone for hours at a time until my parents kicked me off. But now they're potentially playing a video game and talking to their friends at the same time, or are chatting, on some kind of messaging service with their classmates, and that is how they interact with their friends. So it might look like they're just on their phone, and they are, or on their phone or on a device or whatever, but some of that is socializing, and I don't necessarily want to take that away. And raising teenagers is, you know, has always been complicated, and they want to separate from their parents, but they also still want and need guidance from their parents. So that's the place I'm in with 3 out of 4 of my kids, because I've got a group of teenagers now. And then I think with my youngest, my challenge lately has been I'm kind of trying to hold on to him being the baby, and um, maybe not really willing to accept the fact that he's going to be 10 before too long, and still a kid, but he's growing up, and I probably am falling into the trap of what a lot of parents do, and the baby is getting a little bit spoiled. So that's maybe a parenting challenge I have to work on. But he's so cute, and he shouldn't have to work as hard as his older siblings. He's just little. But they will make sure that I know that I'm doing it.
And Katie, what about you? What are some of the challenges you're working through right now?
I think I was trying to come up with an answer to this, and I think Arlene's last bit there really speaks a lot to it. My kids are really close in age, and so more or less both of them are the baby. I mean, one of them will tell the other that she's so much older occasionally, but looking back on it, she seemed big and grown up when he was born, but now I see 16-month-old babies, and I'm like, wow, they're really babies at that age. And weighing when it is right and good and fair to their childhood, I guess, to spoil them or protect them or coddle them or just make their lives as easy as we possibly can, versus when that really will hinder or harm their development as people. Because the fact that we're not raising kids, we're raising adults is very clear to me. But also, they are children, and I want them to enjoy that, and I want there to be that the balance between there being magic and enjoyment and carefree time in their lives versus preparing them. And also the patriarchy. The number of first grade girls who were on diets, I assumed it was bullshit. I assumed that it would be like, not my child, my child will know better. I am raising my kid better than that. And then they start coming home with, well, this food makes you fat. Or, oh, I can't wear that because I'll, this, that, and the other. Or so-and-so said this. And we could homeschool them, and that would remove some of it. And we could never have TV or outside media. And that would at least postpone it. But it wouldn't prepare them the way that we want them to be prepared for the rest of the world. But it is really goddamn hard to explain the concept of the patriarchy to a 7-year-old. And to explain things like, yes, if you eat nothing but Pop-Tarts every day for the rest of your life, that is probably not a great choice. Versus eating a Pop-Tart is A, not a moral thing, and B, probably not going to kill you. And where that balance is between not shaming people and not shaming people who don't believe the same as we do. And they're just getting to be such people, and there's so much outside influence. Like the minute they start leaving the house and noticing that there are things that are bigger than their backyard, you have to start interpreting those things for them. And I don't want to.
That's Katie's biggest parenting challenge. I don't want to.
That's long and the short of it. I don't want to. It's a lot of work. Sometimes I want to, but not things like explaining the patriarchy.
I feel that to my core, in being somebody who is not yet a parent, but probably will be in the next couple years. That terrifies me. That I'm going to have a young girl or even a boy who has different societal expectations. How do I explain to them, again, just as the conversation that we're having now as adults, that you are good enough as you are? Don't let somebody else tell you otherwise, or that you have to eat 9 almonds to make sure that you stay in that. In my mind, I don't even want to say that, because like obviously children have child bodies, and you have a different body when you're 21 than you do when you're 30. Like, you are an always changing human being. And I'm just like thinking back to like what I wish that I would have been told when I was even like a teenager, is like, what can we be telling our kids so that those are not the messages that they're taking and like really holding on to. Like, I can only imagine what a challenge it is to be able to say, okay, like, yep, this is maybe what Susie told you at school, but like, let that go. Like, how do you ingrain a foundational belief in them that everything that they are is good enough, and basically to say screw off to everybody else in like the nicest child way.
I honestly think that I mean, it's probably not the only answer. For us, the best answer has been community. Because if mommy said it, but literally everything else in the world says something else, it's because mommy's crazy, which my kids know. Okay? But if mommy says it and daddy says it and grandma says something that at least shows the same sort of values, and Aunt Arlene says something very similar, and their best friend's mom says something very similar, and they read a book that says something very similar, then that means that maybe that's right and normal. And I have started, I don't know, increased cultivating who I spend time with and really focusing on what my kids hear me saying, and not just about my body or food or whatever, but also this person wasn't very nice. And I don't think it was because they were having a bad day, because if they're not very nice once, or they're not very nice at the end of the day, but it's, a little more than once, then maybe they're just having a hard time. But if they're always like this, it's because that's who they are. And we still have to be kind and respectful, but we don't have to put up with it, and we don't have to listen to it. And to make sure that the respect is what our kids see as normal in our community, that we can disagree, but we still respect each other. And I have a real problem with people saying, well, let's just never talk about politics, because so much of politics can be about respecting that other people have the same rights as you. And if your political values say that some people have rights and some people don't, that's not respect for other people. We can disagree about road funding, fine. We can even disagree about, military budgets or whatever, fine. But if for any reason you're telling my kids that some people or some types of bodies or some types of jobs or whatever are inherently worth more, no. And, even to things like people devalue farming, people devalue manual labor, people devalue less education. There's this endless list of things that aren't as good. And I am trying, at least, sometimes doing a better job than others, to teach my kids that no person is worth more because of X, Y, and Z. And that anybody who really seems to think that someone is worth more because of X, Y, and Z isn't someone whose opinion we should be putting too much weight on. So,
yeah, I love that.
that.
Okay, so flipping that question, what has been your guys' favorite thing about raising kids on the farm?
For me, I think I've talked about this before, and it's farm related, but more family farm related, is watching my kids be able to grow up with their grandparents as neighbors and friends and now coworkers. Watching my kids work alongside my father-in-law in the barn is really special. And when they were, little and would carry water buckets for him in the calf barn, or now when my grandfather or my father-in-law and my daughter are talking about cow genetics together, it's really special to be able to watch that relationship grow. I think especially during COVID, just the ability to be outdoors and to have physical spaces to be able to be and to move our bodies and to take care of, was highlighted and was made even more special during that time. So I think a couple years has passed, but that is still sticks with me. The fact that we spent lots of days just wandering back to the creek and looking for turtles and going fishing or just finding things on our own property that we could do with our kids, and other people just don't have those same advantages.
What about you, Katie? What's been your favorite thing about raising kids on the farm?
part of it for me is that our daughter has started saying a lot of X, Y, and Z because that's what us farmers do. Or, somebody will say, well, do you want to be a farmer when you grow up? And she'll say, I'm already a farmer. And she'll give them this look. Like, she has some seriously, like, resting Ruth Bader Ginsburg face. And she'll just like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. There is no question in either of their minds that they're taking this farm over. And yes, they're 6 and 7. I absolutely believe that there will be at least 90 career changes before they even graduate high school. I hope they want to come back, but it makes me proud that neither of them is questioning that this is a thing they would want to do at the grand old age of 6 and 7. And like Arlene said with the pandemic, and even now, the fact that I can tell my feral ass children, who probably are getting to an age of learning to act like humans, that they can go pee outside. Or that it's not that they can't run and yell, it's that they can't run and yell in the house. But there's 300 acres where they can go be completely feral. And that's fine. And giving them the opportunity to just go fuck with stuff. I mean, little critters, and they find frogs and they find crickets and they find stuff and they look at stuff and they mess with stuff. And that's how they learn. And that's also how they get so dirty that the bathwater routinely changes colors. But they're out there doing the things, and that's worth a hell of a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, like truthfully, like when I tell people, I don't want to say why it hasn't been why I haven't had kids yet, but I truthfully do not want to raise kids in town. Like I really, really don't. Like I joke about it, but it's pretty real. Is like if you go on Instagram and if I were to tag the location of where I'm living, like one of the things that comes up as my location is the ghetto. Like it is. I live right off of a main road. I would not be able to let my kid go outside. God forbid my kid go outside naked. Like, and I don't know who my neighbors are. Like, I have had conversations maybe with the people on either side of my house and then the person across the street from my house. I don't know a single other neighbor on my street. And I want my kids, I always tell people, I'm like, I want feral ranch children. Like, I want my kids to be able to go outside naked and not have to worry about who's looking at them not have to worry, or me not have to worry about getting CPS called on me. It's just not how I want to raise my kids. And I get that, any kid that I have is probably going to be fine regardless of where I raise them, but it's the lifestyle that I want for them. So I just really, really admire you guys for how you guys have talked about parenting and how, Katie, that you're trying to grow like real humans, because that is something that like I aspire to be. So I just really, really admire you guys for that.
I think it's definitely important to remember that town kids tend to have a lot of opportunities that my kids do not have. We're going to have to travel for my kids to ever experience riding a city bus and like learn how to do that. My kids don't get music lessons right now because there's no teachers in the area. Like I feel like there can be a danger as rural parents for it to sound very like, oh, those poor town children, those poor, pale, sickly, indoorsy, quiet, clean, aesthetic little children. And I don't ever want to sound like I am negative towards that because they get to experience a lot of amazing things. We're going to have to drive almost 2 hours for my kids to learn to drive on a 4-lane road. Like, that's just how our life is. But raising my kids in particular would be like having 2 rabid border collies in town. Like, yeah, we'd figure it out, but nobody would be happy. And I think it is important to be glad for the benefits that we get from it without putting down the benefits that other people get from doing what they do. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good perspective too. I know we're running behind on time, and I don't know what this is going to top out at.
Krista, you edit our show. You know how long-winded I am, at least.
I know. That's why I'm like, how far can we stretch this? If you guys are okay with it, I would really still like to ask you guys what you would win, what category you would win at the county fair. But maybe for the sake of our audience, we can make that as a little bonus that maybe they get in the Patreon group. And we'll cut that part out, and they can only get it if you are part of the Patreon group. What do you guys think about that?
I love it. Yes. Krista's always thinking about how we should be promoting our show more. Because reminder, people, we're doing this for free. Actually, we're losing money because Krista is not doing this for free. Katie and I are.
Which she shouldn't be because she does a lot of work. But also, yes, it is expensive.
Oh yeah. No, I'm saying she gets paid. So it costs us money to do the show, which is fine because it's a hobby and we love it. So we are doing it because we love it. So we'll go ahead and say it, but we are going to cut this from the show.
Okay, so for those of you that are Patreon members, I hope you enjoyed that. That was a great little excerpt. We might need to do this more. And for those of you that are not Patreon members and you're listening to the regular episode, we are going to move into the final segment, which is the cussing and discussing segment. So, Arlene, what are you cussing and discussing today?
So, as we've discussed already in this episode, it's just recently that I went to visit Katie, and that was in September. This episode's going to come out in October, but it's still not all that long ago. And I want to cuss and discuss the fact that we live, far enough apart, but being in rural places makes transportation so darn difficult because it took, 2 long drives, 2 medium-sized flights, transfer time going between terminals, all that kind of stuff. Took so many hours to get between, my rural place to Katie's rural place, which I know that's how transportation works. It doesn't make sense to have a direct flight from Smiths Falls, Ontario to Postville, Iowa. But it's still a big drag. And I looked it up on Google, and my trip there took less time than if I had driven straight through. My trip home took a little bit more time than if I had driven straight through. But I wouldn't have been able to do it. I can't drive 16 hours straight, so that wasn't going to happen anyway. But yeah, transportation, boo. But the people watching in airports is pretty great. I saw some pretty nice outfits in New Jersey yesterday, so that almost made it worth it.
So you connected through New Jersey?
Yeah, on the way there, I connected through Montreal. So I went both times I went to the East Coast and then went west. Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
All right. Katie, what are you cussing and discussing today?
Well, to go with Arlene's theme of traveling, I have 2 work trips coming up in the next 2 months, both with that, 3-hour drive to Minneapolis to fly somewhere kind of thing. But realizing what my neurodiversity and my general anxiety levels do to things like packing for a work trip, where it's like I have a very informal job, but my next meeting especially is with the highest level leadership for the fairly large company I work for at the global headquarters of the even bigger company that owns us. And knowing how important it is to me to have comfortable clothes and things I feel secure in versus looking like a grown-up, which farming and working from home is not generally a concern. Plus, the issue with always having 12 crochet projects going is figuring out which one project I'm going to bring for a week, which is completely unnatural and unreasonable. I always overpack. I know I overpack. I hate that I overpack. I don't know how not to. It's just completely incompatible with my brain. And short of literally, and maybe I'll just try this time, having someone come over and take half the shit out of my bag and just not tell me, and also double check that I have my toothbrush. There's no part of my brain that can make sense of not overpacking. It's just not who I am. And I hate it.
Yeah, because you never know if you might need those extra things. You like, we don't know what's going to happen.
And I know full well that I'm not going to touch them. I know I won't. But I can't not do it. And so if anyone has any great suggestions for the trip I will have already been on.
It's too late. Time travel.
I don't have any because I'm also an overpacker. Yeah, so
Okay.
Sorry for that.
Well,
okay.
Maybe somebody will have a suggestion before my next trip.
What about you, Krista? What are you cussing and discussing this week?
Honestly, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think I am cussing the expectations that society has put on us to be successful. And yeah, it was.
Successful,
thank you. Yeah, it wasn't finger quotations, because as I get older, I'm realizing that and I'm 31 for reference for anybody listening, so obviously very different, maybe not a different age demographic than rural moms out there, but I think society has put a different label of success, and it has caused like such a level of burnout in women specifically that we have to be all the things all the time. And I'm not even a mom yet, and I'm feeling that. And I'm just tired of it. Like, I really, like, I can't tell you how many times in a day, and I work for myself, and I don't have the pressure of a 9-to-5 or somebody telling me what to do. And I still sometimes just want to throw everything in the trash and burn it and go live in a hut in the forest and call it a day. You know, so I'm fighting the urge, and it is.
Yeah, and you're your own boss. Yeah, you're the boss in your head is the real taskmaster.
Yeah, she's awful. So yeah, that is.
Does she give good performance reviews?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it depends on the day. So yeah, that's what I'm cussing and discussing. So if anybody else feels like that, you're not alone. And I hope this entire conversation has made you feel like you're a little less alone. And I'm going to do a plug here for them. If you liked the show and you love what you heard, let them know. Send them an email. I'm pretty sure their email is in the show notes. You can also follow them on Instagram, and they post some pretty fun content. I do think you guys are due for an update on your map of guests heading into season 4.
I did one the other day. It's there's more colors. Yeah.
Perfect. So go check that out if you guys haven't seen it.
And we got some new guests out of it too.
There you go. I love that. All right. Do you guys have anything else you want to add on before we wrap up the show?
I think I just want to thank Krista for saving us from ourselves, because trying to do the show alone was taking the love out of it, and having someone be able to do such an amazing job to both inspire us and encourage us and be someone else to bounce ideas off of, and also do such a great job editing for us has made all the difference in the world, because I don't think we would have been doing season 4 if it was just Katie and I working at this still. So thank you. And thank you for starting the network too, because connecting with other podcasters is another community that we need.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I'm thrilled. You guys are like I don't want to say my spoiled client, but I really enjoy working with you guys. I think the conversations that you guys have are so important. And honestly, all conversations in the ag space are so important to have. But I think parenting specifically, and just the you are not alone conversation is so, so, so important to have. So like I said, I admire everything you guys are and everything you guys talk about. So if this is your first time tuning in, make sure to go back, listen to the episodes that have been mentioned on the show. And if you really want, I think you should subscribe on Patreon, because you get some fun exclusive content. I'm pretty sure, like the videos, you get some clips that you don't get on the normal podcast. And yeah, definitely. I think this is a cause worth supporting. So Thank you for having me, guys. And thanks for giving me the honor of editing your show. It's truly I love doing it. So
Thank you. That makes it easier for us to flub up as often as we do and think, well, she likes it, so
I do. I'm going to have a blooper reel going of Krista, delete this.
That's what we need in the Patreon. Cut those out and put them all in one place for us. Yeah, that's right.
I can do that.
We can just have a little scoreboard of how many bloopers you cut out per episode, Krista.
Yeah, that's right. And we'll be back next week with a guest that is not just us.
There we go. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you, ladies. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krysta Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.